Hello, my name is Jim Ward. I'm a citizen of South Bend and a bit of a child in the 70s. Charity and Ripple Effect, thank you for inviting me. The Stonewall riots in New York City happened in June of 1969. The riots were a series of protests and clashes with the members of the LGBT community and the police, sparked by a raid of the Stonewall Inn, a gay bar in Greenwich Village. I'm going to talk a bit about the impact on my life and the entire world these riots had, but I first want to acknowledge something very important. While the riots themselves were not sponsored by any organization or individual, the participants were primarily transgender and primarily women of color. Two women participated, Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, went on to become leaders of the movement. The 70s were a turning point for LGBTQ plus rights in the United States. The effect rippled outwards, shaping the experiences of LGBTQ people across the country for years to come. Before Stonewall, the community was almost invisible. Virtually no politicians talked about us, and the only those of us in gay neighborhoods in the larger cities could gather safely in public. For years, young folks in the 70s, excuse me. For young folks in the 70s, Stonewall sparked something very important, and that was visibility. One of the immediate effects of the Stonewall riots was a recognition and a spotlight on the gay liberation movement, which sought to fight for the rights of LGBTQ community and challenge the norms and attitudes towards homosexuality. Suddenly, in cities across the country, there were parades, there were gatherings, and there were news articles. There was discussion and there was debate. The community was no longer invisible. For a small town kid in the 1970s, being out was not really an option. There was no support, and my parents were no different than most back then. We never discussed it. Our church never discussed it. My teachers never discussed it. But what I could do was go to the library. There was no internet, but there were indexes to magazines. Now these articles I could find were not very informative or helpful. Most of them were about marches in New York or San Francisco or LA or Chicago, and the reporting was as often negative or dismissive as it was supportive. But these Newsweek and Time Magazine and Life Magazine and New York Times articles did one thing for me. They told me that I was not alone. So my generation in the 1970s was the first where LGBTQ kids might know that they were not a flaw, but they were just another way that people can be. Had I been to college before the 1970s, I might never have had the self-acceptance to ever come out. But once in college, I did meet other students, men and women, who were like me, who were real people. It wasn't easy, but coming out to friends was terrifying, and the reactions were not always kind, but most were. For me, what I wanted to share this because I think it's common. What can be the hardest thing about coming out is that being LGBTQ is a small piece of what we are, and we worry that all people will think of when they think of us is that. Nowadays, there is less ignorance and more tolerance, but the road for many remains rough. Once out of college, thanks to Stonewall and the brave folks of the 1970s, there was a community to welcome me. The slow building of awareness and allyship in the 70s laid the foundations that allowed kids like me to survive as a young gay man in the 80s. Then came the awful years of AIDS. Just as I came out in New York, but at least we had a community to take care of each other. The ironic result of these years, where so many died, is that our visibility was no greater. Suddenly, families across the country had to face up to the fact that they had a gay brother, an uncle, a cousin, or a colleague at work. And out of that human story, we were no longer ignorable. And we were out and we were visible. And then the community building that took place with the internet, great progress happened again. Our right to serve in the military anti-discrimination laws, the affirming of many churches and synagogues, and of course, marriage equality. Progress is obvious, but danger remains. Now we see efforts in many states, including my own here in Indiana, to roll back these rights. We see new efforts to thwart our visibility by banning books and forbidding classroom discussion of our existence and our history. Because those who want to take away our rights know that visibility is our strength. The relentless attack on us, to erase our trans cousins, and the part of our family who actually fought at Stonewall are our trans cousins. This is ugly, and we will fight back. 3 final words. First, to our allies, you are everything. Now more than ever, you can change minds. Thank you. Second, to any young folks out there, know your history. I used to think that there was enough, that there was just power in your assumption that you had rights, you had the right to be visible and to be out there, but recent history has proved me wrong. Learn now and understand where your rights came from, who fought them. The struggle was real, and now people are trying to take it away. So learn this, and once you are 18, never, ever miss an election. And finally, folks, our community is also one of joy and celebration and love. We have the best music. We've always had the best music. So gather and dance and love. Okay.